In this problem, we are being asked to use the information derived from this table, which schedules out the amortization of a loan. The loan is given as $500,000. So in other words, we are the issuers of a note in exchange for getting cash as a loan of $500,000. That's the initial balance of that loan. The actual journal entry that we book at issuance would be simply a debit to the cash account for the amount of the loan, or $500,000. I'm looking for my pen. I'll just use this blue one. And we're also going to be crediting the long-term liability, in this case long-term notes payable, for the same amount. Now, in terms of the actual schedule to amortize the loan, how we set up the schedule is actually important, because it will give us the numbers that we need for the following journal entries. Now, they do give us this amount as a given amount, but we could actually figure out what that is on our own. Again, it's not that important for us in this case, but if we were to do that, you can always use this sort of formula to figure out what that would be. You would take the present value, which in this case would be the $500,000, and divide by the present value of annuity factor. And in a different lesson, we will talk what that is. And the result of that will give you this number. And this is a fixed payment that you provide to the investor for 12 months each year over about 23 years. So if you do that, what portion of that loan, what portion of this payment is actually interest expense, and what portion of that payment is paid down on the balance? So as you can see, that's how the schedule is set up, to continually figure out what that is. What's the breakout between the interest expense and the pay down, or what we call in this case the loan amortization on that loan. Now let's talk about this item here. And I've given you on top of this the formula that you would follow. You figure that to get that amount, you're going to take the prior balance, in this case for the first period, or the first month here, period 1, month number 1. It will be the prior ending balance, in this case $500,000, and multiply times the periodic interest rate. Now, if you go to the given amount, to the given percentage for this loan, they would show you it will be a 6% annual percentage rate. Since we're talking about 12 months for the year, and this being a yearly rate, 6% divided by 12 months would mean that on a monthly basis, we are talking about 0.5%. So if you multiply 0.5% times the balance beginning, or actually balance ending from the prior period, which would be the beginning balance for the loan, times the 0.5%, you would get this amount, $2,500. Given that that's the interest expense from this payment, the remainder will be the pay down on that loan. So that's what we get from $500,000 minus the 1097.30, which is the pay down, to get us to the ending balance at the end of the first period of $498,902.70. You follow the very same process in the following period. Again, you have a second payment at the end of the second month of the same amount, $3597.30. To figure that out, you would have to go to the beginning balance on that loan at the beginning of that of period 2, which would be the same thing as the ending balance on the prior period. So $498,902 times the 0.5% would give you $2494.51. Given that is the portion of this payment that represents interest expense, the difference between these two amounts here columns 1 and 2 will give you the 1102.79. That's a pay down. That means that this number here, the ending balance from the prior period, is reduced by that amount down to 497,799.91. So we follow the same approach each period. That's how you would actually figure out the pay down and the interest expense for each period. If you keep doing the same process over the first 12 months, the overall pay down of the loan for that first year after those 12 months would be a total of $13,535. Now that actually talks to the second part of the requirements, of the second requirement for this problem, which is to book the journal entry that relates to the reclassification of the portion of the long-term note that is due within the following year. So if you assume period 1 happens, you don't see it here, but period 1 is January, period 2 will be February, and so on up to the end of month 12, which will be December. That full year is currently due in the current year. That's what becomes here. Well, that's what is booked into the current portion. So you're basically transferring out from the long-term note payable that portion that is due in the current period. So that's the reason you say you have a debit to long-term notes payable and basically a transfer to the current portion of long-term notes payable account. This one is a long-term account. This is a short-term account. And so here's the reclass. And finally, for this problem, they also asked to book the entry for the interest expense for the first period. So let me go back to this first period that we already looked at before. So as you can see, you can get from this first line the numbers you will need for the first payment. The payment itself, as we said before, is fixed. So the cash payment is simply the payment that comes from here, from this column. So you see cash going down or credited for $3597.30. The interest expense comes from column number 2, and we already figured out that it will be $2,500. And the difference, the pay down, will be what you use to pay down the balance of that long-term payable account, and that's the reason you have a debit to that account there. That takes care of that first payment. For the second payment, if you were to go to period number 2, you will follow a similar approach. And so I'm just going to go down and show you this to just kind of reiterate what we just talked about. Again, the payment for that second period, without we're talking here February, I'm sorry, here, right there. The cash is paid out, so you have a credit to cash. Interest expense comes from here, $2494.51, and the pay down will be $1102.79.